Thanks, Lou. I'm New Mexico In Focus correspondent Russell Contreras, here to put as much as Bill Richardson's legacy into context as I can in this limited space of time. Joining me today at the table is Martha Burke. She's the author and host of the podcast Equal Time with Martha Burke. Across the table is Steve Terrell, retired reporter with the Santa Fe New Mexican. And finally, of course, it's the wonderful Diane Dennis, who served 8 years as lieutenant governor under Bill Richardson. It's great to see you all back. We begin today's show looking back at the life and political career of former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, who died in his sleep this past weekend at the age of 75. Richardson left a deep footprint in the politics, not just here in New Mexico, but other places. He spent 14 years representing our state in Congress before becoming a UN ambassador, an energy secretary, and finally 2 terms of governor. It would be impossible to recount every statement praising his life and career, but one that stands out came from New Mexico Congressman Gabe Vasquez, who called Richardson, quote, one of the most powerful Hispanics in politics that this nation has seen. We'll get into his long list of accomplishments and some of the scandals that followed him, but I want to ask all of you, all as New Mexicans looking back at his legacy, how did Richardson stand out as a lawmaker, as a member of the House in the 1990s, and as governor between 2003 and 2011? I'll start with you, Diane. You work with him closely. What do you remember about him as a governor and as a politician trying to make New Mexico a better place?
You know, I thought he took a lot of risk of things he wanted to do. He brought hope and optimism through some of his initiatives to New Mexico. He improved the lives of women in New Mexico, but he improved in healthcare. He took some initiatives way before Obamacare to ensure kids on their policies until they were 26. We passed the Pregnancy Premium Assistant Program, things that later became part of Obamacare. So he was ahead of his time on some of his initiatives. And for me, the spaceport, nothing says that like the spaceport. He brought such a vision of what it could be in the future and actually what it's going to become over time. It takes a long time for these initiatives. He did promise us we would maybe have a launch in 2 years after we first announced it. It didn't. It took a little longer than that. But meanwhile, it's been a wonderful educational opportunity for kids from that part of the state or from kids all over New Mexico and for scientists. So taking those risks, he wanted them to pay off, and he worked hard to get those things done. He knew how to negotiate with the legislature. He knew how to, for instance, take the food tax off with 1 vote margin in the House. He was just he really was very intuitive about not only his own, how to forward his own interest, but what were their interests in doing these big things.
You mentioned the spaceport, but you also had the Rail Runner. There was also, his abolishing the death penalty, establishing a foundation for the film industry, and creating the nation's first pay equity initiative. It goes on and on. What do you remember about that, the Rail Runner? And that was so groundbreaking at the time. We kind of laugh at it now, yeah. But we didn't have this. What do you remember about that?
Well, what I remember is there were, of course, a lot of negotiations with the railroad companies to try to get it. He always wanted it to go all the way to Las Cruces, and so that people could travel across the state. But what I remember about it was that he had a woman in the State Transportation Department, Rhonda Fott, and I remember there were many negotiations with highway people, and so he didn't have to just get it done in the legislature. He had to get it done through the administrative processes too, and all the right-of-ways and the things that happened. And the film industry, I wanted to say, that had been languishing since 1968 when Dave Cargo was governor. Sure. That was the first film commission. And Bill had been, percolating about that for a long time. And then he hired really good people around him that knew the subject matter. I think that's one of the keys for Bill Richardson was he wasn't afraid of star power or people who knew more than he did. And as one of the deputy UN ambassador, Nancy Solderberg, told me, he knew what he didn't know.
Steve, a lot of people have great ideas, previous governors, but it was Richardson's style that was able to get things done. What can you tell us about a style to get stuff like the Rail Runner fixed, and also reforming the Department of Education?
his style, well, first of all, his style, a lot of people criticized him for being like a rumpled. He was an everyman in his appearance. Big guy, heavy set, but I think it was a combination of sweet talk and arm twisting. He worked behind the scenes. He wasn't afraid to twist arms, but he tried to work with people. He tried to work with Republicans, and successfully often, and so his style, it was bipartisan in a lot of ways, but you always knew who he was the boss. So that's what I remember about him, and I think that's why he was successful in so many things.
Martha, you were an unofficial cabinet member under Richardson with a fancy title, Senior Policy Advisor for Women's Issues. He was a kind of a nest of paradoxes. He was pro-business, he was pro-choice Catholic who cut taxes, he believed in public works. How do you navigate these contradictions when pushing these issues that you thought deserved attention? And you have to remember, he was also a Clinton cabinet member who came from that ethos, and we had some criticism on how he viewed women. How did you negotiate that?
Well, it was, shall we say, a very formal relationship I had with him. We were colleagues, we worked together. Well, I was first hired by him for the campaign, the presidential campaign, which, as we know, did not last very long. But we went to New Hampshire and Iowa, and he wanted, because I had just come from Washington, and I had a lot of national press experience. And I also knew in depth what went on in Capitol Hill, what bills were there, all of that. Because I had a fairly, presence in the media when I was there, I think he knew all of that, and he thought he could benefit from my knowledge, and I hope he did. He certainly listened to what I told him in terms of what I thought was important for the presidential debates, and then we will get in later to what I did for him after he dropped out of that. And but I found him to be extremely receptive to me and to the ideas he hired me to educate him further on. It wasn't that he didn't know about what needed to be done, but he wanted more detail. He was always, he wanted to know sort of what was under the radar on things because he didn't like to be surprised.
As we all know, Richardson's second term was in some ways derailed by a series of scandals. Federal grand jury investigations into alleged pay-to-play and campaign finance violations. No charges were ever came, but the controversies were enough to close the door on a potential cabinet seat in the Obama administrations. How did those battles shape the way New Mexicans thought about Bill Richardson then and now? Because you remember this, President Obama, future President Obama, was calling him all the time. So was Hillary Clinton, saying, "What do you need?" And then all of a sudden he was gone. He was off the stage. What happened?
Yeah, after he took himself out of consideration for the cabinet, he became political poison. I think Diane knows this more than any of us. I think that cost you your governor's race back in 2010. So yeah, he was. I would almost call that his exile period. He still, after he left the governor's office, he started the Richardson Center for what's the formal name but it's basically helping hostages internationally, and he kept that up. Didn't, but yeah, nobody was asking for Richardson's endorsement or anything when they're running for office. After these scandals, especially after the cabinet position went kaplooey.
Lieutenant Governor, I always thought that you were running for this seat. You were trying to follow Governor Richardson, advocating for some of the policies. But did you feel that when Susana Martinez was running against you, she kept throwing his name? She seldom said your name, because then she would have to debate the issues, which polls show they backed you. Do you feel that hurt you in your race? And could he have done anything to help you?
Well, we had many conversations during my race, and his advice to me was to stay away from him. because he was a political realist, and he knew that associating myself. But I tried not to run away from things that I thought were successful things we did during the campaign. But he was a very good advisor to me during that time, and was very careful not to promote me because that would be used against me. So, you know, at the end of the day, we had a lot of fun and some sad moments when he pulled his name out. You know, I was in Washington when that happened, and he called me I was shopping for some shoes to go to a conference with Democratic governors, and he, you know, he said it's a bad day for me, and I think he felt really bad about that. But I do think that when you ask the question about how did it form people's opinion, in the short term, I think that, you know, it affected him very negatively. In the long term, I think Bill Richardson will have a huge legacy of impact on New Mexico and how he really affected people's lives and changed some people's lives.
Martha, with all the ups and downs, briefly, what's the balance in Richard's legacy? How do we look at it now?
Well, of course, I look at it through a gender lens, and he did a really progressive work in terms of pay equity for women. He didn't mind taking advice. If he didn't know something, as I said, he would ask, and he wanted to understand it in depth. But then he would pretty much, he knew the professionals knew what they were doing for the most part. He would stay hands off, but he always wanted to be in the loop. And I think that was one of his strengths. He knew where to go for the stuff that he needed to know more about. And he wasn't ashamed to say, I need to know more about this so I can be more effective in getting it done.
Thanks to our special panel for this discussion. We'll be back again in about 30 minutes to discuss how Richardson shaped perceptions of New Mexico on the national and international stages.